Apologize right now. Say the words. The entire hearing room froze, cameras locked. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Because the man sitting at that witness table, the man who had spent 3 years as Donald Trump's personal defense attorney in federal court, the man who had just been sworn in as Attorney General of the United States a matter of weeks ago, had absolutely nowhere to go. But Murray wasn't really asking for an apology. She was trying to answer a much darker question. Who was this Justice Department actually protecting? The survivors, or the powerful people whose names still remained hidden behind black redaction lines? That question didn't start in this hearing room. It started with a decision made inside the DOJ that would define Todd Blanche's tenure before it had barely begun. Here's what the public was told. When Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Department of Justice conducted a massive document review. 6 million pages, sensitive materials, historical records, a years-long operation finally forced into sunlight by legislative mandate. Here's what the public was not told. While survivors' names, personal information, and the most intimate documentation of their worst experiences were released openly to the public, the names of alleged perpetrators in those same files were carefully, methodically, and deliberately redacted, blacked out, protected. Let that land for a second. The DOJ worked harder to shield the powerful than to protect the vulnerable. That is not an accusation. That is what the documents showed. That is what Senator Murray walked into that room prepared to prove. And in a department that was supposed to represent blind justice, the kind carved in stone above courthouse doors across this country, that asymmetry was not a minor procedural error. It was a statement. Whether intentional or not, it was a declaration about whose privacy mattered more. And Murray intended to make sure Todd Blanche answered for it under oath. And Todd Blanche, former personal attorney for Donald Trump, a man who had argued in 4 separate federal proceedings that his client deserved the benefit of every legal protection available, was now the man in charge of the department that had made that choice. The conflict at the center of this hearing wasn't just political, it was structural. How do you transition from defending one man to being accountable to all Americans? How do you walk from a Manhattan courtroom where you spent years arguing on behalf of the most powerful individual in the country, directly into a chair where your job is to be the last line of defense for people with no power at all? That transition requires more than a title change. It requires a fundamental reordering of who you serve. And the evidence in Murray's folder suggested that reordering had not yet happened inside the Department of Justice. Murray had spent weeks building toward this moment. She had met with survivors personally. She had sat across from women who described in specific terms the experience of having the federal government expose their most private information, not by accident, not through oversight, but through a process that somehow found time to protect the alleged wrongdoers while failing the people who had already suffered the most. One of those survivors had told Murray something that she carried into the hearing room. She hadn't just felt violated by the original events. She had felt violated again when she found out the government had released her information while hiding the names of those she accused. They protected them, this woman said. Not us, them. 3 words, and in those 3 words was the entire case that Murray was about to make on national television. Who protected them? That was the question underneath every question Murray was about to ask. But here's what no one in that room knew yet, and this is the detail that changed everything. Murray's folder didn't just contain the redaction records, it contained something Blanche's preparation team had never seen coming: internal DOJ communications from the weeks leading up to the document release. Emails between senior department officials discussing which categories of information to prioritize in the redaction process. Discussions that made clear the decision to protect certain names wasn't a resource limitation. It wasn't a time constraint. It was a deliberate strategic choice made at a level above the career staff who had been publicly blamed for the errors. Blanche didn't know she had those emails. He would find out the hard way. The first hour of the hearing had gone exactly as his team had scripted it, confident, smooth. He spoke about new leadership, about restoring institutional integrity, about his commitment to following the facts wherever they led. Several Republican committee members offered him warm softballs about crime statistics and border enforcement. Blanche batted them away effortlessly, looking every inch the part of a newly confirmed cabinet official in command of his brief. Then Senator Murray was recognized. She didn't build up to it. She didn't contextualize or frame. She went straight to the wound. "Your department," she said, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone reading from a verdict. exposed the sensitive personal information and private documentation of survivors, while redacting the names of individuals accused of wrongdoing in those same files. The message that sends is this: the Department of Justice worked harder to protect potential wrongdoers than the people those wrongdoers harmed. Blanche's jaw tightened. Barely. But the cameras were 2 feet from his face. He reached for the prepared answer. The review was massive. 6 million documents, compressed timeline. The error rate was statistically minimal. His voice carried the practiced confidence of a man who had delivered opening statements in front of federal juries. He believed he was managing the narrative. Murray set down her pen. Will you apologize to the survivors? Silence. 3 full seconds of it. His communications aide behind him stopped moving entirely. Then came the answer that would define the first chapter of his tenure. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes. He began explaining the legal framework of the Transparency Act. He cited the timeline. He described the responsive process his department had implemented after errors were flagged. He used the word mistakes. He used the phrase, "we failed." He did not say, "I apologize." He did not say, "I am sorry." He explained. Murray leaned into the microphone. I still haven't heard those words. I apologize. Can you say them? And here is where the folder mattered, because Murray reached for it, so not dramatically, not theatrically, just with the quiet certainty of someone who knows they don't need theater. And she placed a printed email on the table in front of her. I want to ask you about a communication from inside your department, she said, dated 3 weeks before the document release, in which senior DOJ officials discussed, and I'm quoting directly, prioritizing name protection for individuals of significant public profile. The color left Blanche's face, not all at once. Gradually, the way color leaves a room when the light changes. That is a question about a specific internal communication, he said carefully, and I would need to review. You don't need to review it, Murray said. I'm reading it to you right now. The question is, was protecting individuals of significant public profile the same standard applied to survivors? Yes or no? 14 seconds of silence. 14. The room didn't breathe. We apply consistent standards across all review categories, Blanche finally offered. Murray looked at him the way a prosecutor looks at a witness who has just made the mistake of trying to be clever. That is not what this email says, and I think you know that. She pivoted without pause. I want to give you an opportunity that your predecessor was given and declined to fully take. I want you to commit, not the department, not a spokesperson, you personally, to reaching out to survivors, not waiting for them to navigate a system that has already failed them. You, picking up the phone, asking to meet. Blanche retreated to protocol. If victims had legal representation, direct outreach created ethical complications. Standard procedure required communication through counsel. His voice had lost some of its earlier polish, the polish of someone who has just realized the room has shifted beneath him. I'm not asking about ethics rules, Murray said quietly. I'm asking about human accountability, something your predecessor couldn't manage. Something I genuinely hope you can, she paused. And then she said something that had not been scripted, not been telegraphed, not been previewed in any briefing document. You spent years defending one man, she said, years. You were very good at it. But that is not this job. This job is defending people who cannot afford you, people who never had a defense attorney, people whose names ended up in public documents, while the names of those who allegedly harmed them were hidden by your department. I hope, and I mean this, I hope you are not going to make the same mistakes as the person who sat in that chair before you. I hope you are on the side of justice, not on the side of whoever appointed you. The room was absolutely still. Blanche stared at the table for a moment. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed. The defense attorney's composure, that specifically trained ability to absorb a damaging question without revealing its impact, was still there. But underneath it, something had cracked. We will follow up, he said, on all of it. 4 words. Offered not as a commitment, offered as the only exit available. Murray gathered her papers. She had one more question, and she delivered it without looking up. The survivors are still waiting. I'd encourage you not to make them wait much longer, because the longer they wait, the more this looks like a pattern. And patterns, Mr. Attorney General, are very difficult to walk back. No response came. The gavel moved the hearing forward, but the damage was already done. Not in headlines, not in formal consequences, but in something more permanent. In the public record, in the faces of the survivors watching from the gallery who now knew, with complete certainty, what question had finally been asked out loud. And in the eyes of every career DOJ official watching from their desks, wondering whether the man who now led their department had understood what just happened, or whether he had simply survived it. There is a difference between surviving a hearing and passing one. Todd Blanche survived. Whether he passed is a question the survivors are still waiting to have answered. And now here's the question for you. Do you think Todd Blanche will prove he's different? Or will his performance follow the exact same path as his predecessor Pam Bondi's? He has the same title. He sits in the same chair. He serves the same president. So far, he gave the same non-answers. The survivors are still waiting for an apology, for a meeting, for their names to matter as much as the names that were redacted. Drop your answer in the comments, because the people who watched this hearing and the people who lived through what it was about deserve to know whether you believe this time will be any different.